The Pediatric Lounge, a podcast taking you behind the door of the physician's lounge to get a deeper insight into just what docs are talking about today. From the clinically profound to the wonderfully routine and everything in between. Hi, George. It's good to see you again.
Hey, Dr. Bravo. We are here on the Pediatric Lounge, elevating great physicians once again. And today we have Dr. RobertSaul, and we're going to talk about his book, Conscious Parenting. It's pretty interesting stuff. So let's take it away.
Hi, Dr. Saul. It's great to see you and have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here today.
We always start by asking people, why did you become a pediatrician?
Oh, that's a good question. I was decided to go to medical school late. That is, it wasn't until I was a junior in college that I decided to go to medical school. So I had to cram all my science courses in the last 2 years. And my first wife and I got involved as foster parents in taking care of children with disabilities. So that certainly piqued my interest. And as I got into medical school, I wanted to do everything. I mean, I wanted to be an internist, a radiologist, a dermatologist, not a surgeon. I was okay with that. Not OB, not OB. But I realized as I got closer to the end and tried to figure out what I wanted to do, pediatrics was where I was at. So it wasn't by default, but I think it was by my experience as a foster parent and seeing what families go through and seeing the trials and tribulations of children that led me in that direction.
Interesting.
Wow. What was a transitional internship like in 1976 at Duke? That doesn't exist anymore in pediatrics.
No, it was, and it was, it was hard. It was a lot of work. I mean, I think, we used to have those 100-hour weeks. We were on call every third night. And I remember one month we were on call every other night until we had a resident rebellion to fight against that. But at the same time, at least my faculty was very nurturing and was understood what we were going through. And despite the stresses and strains, they're definitely there to help and nurture us through that. So I do remember one night, oh gosh, it was about 3 a.m. And the chief resident came up to the call room and said, "I've got your fourth admission." And I was just working up my first admission. And I remember just breaking down in tears.
Wow.
But I got through it.
Yeah, we all did.
What's the concept of transitional year and that internship? What was it? Did you go through like OB, surgery, pediatrics, and internal medicine, or whatever you wanted?
No, actually, I mean, for my residency, all 3 years were pediatrics.
Okay.
But it was just, I mean, it felt transitional because it's the transition to being a newly minted doctor with a diploma and a doctor that now has some responsibility.
Okay.
And so in that sense, I felt very transitional. Of course, I still feel transitional. That's okay.
So you've had a long and storied career. You've written 4 books. What do you think is the biggest change in pediatric that you have seen during your career that's made the biggest impact?
I was thinking about that question, and there's probably so many things, but a couple things came to mind quickly. One is vaccines. I remember when I was a resident, I signed too many death certificates for illnesses that people don't even see now. Haemophilus influenza, meningitis, Haemophilus influenza, epiglottitis, pneumococcal meningitis. And because when I started in practice in 1979, the only vaccines we had were, DPT and maybe threw in some measles. So it was that dramatic change. And that's been so hard and discouraging, seeing the sort of the misinformation, disinformation about vaccines now. Well, a couple other things. One is now understanding more about trauma-informed care. And we used to just think about when kids were problems, we asked the question, what the heck's wrong with you? Now we're more inclined to say what happened to you and to try to get back into what we can do to help nurture them going forward instead of just put the clamps to them. The other thing that's been exciting is support groups. As a medical geneticist, I dealt with a lot of families that had rare and unusual conditions. And they would come to me, they would come to other doctors and say, well, tell me what I can expect. And most of us knew I had no idea what they could expect, except what we read in the textbooks about 10 patients. But now that these support groups have come along for these various conditions that are rare, but now hundreds of people around the country and around the world can get together and say, this is what I think you can expect. This is how we dealt with sleep issues. This is how we dealt with diet issues that your doctor has no idea how to deal with. So support groups have just been tremendous. And that's one of the positive things with the internet and computers. And the last I would go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. No.
Oh, and just care for the medically complex. At the end of my career, I was for the last 2.5 years, I was taking care of children in a medically complex clinic, and seeing that integrated team approach, helping those families in a much more integrated way than trying to fight the maze of medical care has been a real exciting thing for me.
I think to your point of community and support groups, that has been one of the great things about the internet and social media when done properly. That has not been something that has been taught to pediatricians or internists or physicians as a whole. We're still very much each in our own library, and we don't do enough mastermind groups or coaching groups together to generate ideas and understand how others might have seen the same problems and solved them without me having to spend 3 hours agonizing over it. That has been a positive impact. There's been a lot of negative impacts, but that has been a positive impact. Right. What do you think that is our biggest challenge as pediatricians now? What do we still need to do?
A couple things. I don't know. I think pediatricians are still trusted, but there has been this erosion of trust in the pediatric community as a whole. I think local pediatricians are still very much trusted, but there's been this distrust that has really fomented as with the pandemic and messaging that unfortunately people have been able to attack us with that has been so unfortunate. So I think that's a huge challenge. But the other big challenge, and maybe we can get into that later, I think our well child care is pardon my language here, is bass backwards. That I think we are concentrating on, unfortunately, because of the computers in the exam room, we're concentrating on checking the boxes and not concentrating as much on developing the rapport and the trust and dealing with the really important issues. I mean, I've always argued, and I understand this is hyperbole, that we could not lay a stethoscope on a child and do perfectly fine and really address more important issues during the time we're in the exam room.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think started with what's that Healthy Kids, or that 2-page thing you're supposed to go over in every physical with the parents.
The Bright Futures, or
Bright
something?
Futures. Yeah, Bright Futures. I can't stand that idea. I'm not a computer, and my patients are not computers. I'm not just a data point. What's enjoyable about the well child exams is that relationship. And it's often the mother, when you just let her talk, that says, Johnny's my third kid and he doesn't talk like the other two. You think there might be something wrong? Oh yeah, well, let's see. I mean, it's just about listening.
Yeah.
It's just about.
I think the Bright Futures has value, but I think it should be a guide only. not a absolute. When I use it, I go in the room and I read the room, all right, and I talk to them about what I think their kid is doing, what their family dynamics has. You know, if I see a rambunctious kid running all over the place, of course I'll talk to them more about safety than about potty training. And I won't talk to them about guns because they're not a police officer. So you got to focus on what the room is doing, what the patient is doing, I think. But a lot of physicians, and this is where they get stuck with, I have no time. They have to do the 15, 20 bullet points, and they talk and they talk and they talk and they talk and they never get out of the room.
Well, the end of my career, the last 8 years of my career, I was medical director of the largest Medicaid clinic in the state of South Carolina. So, I felt that pressure as soon as I walked through the door to get through and get to the next patient. So we needed to, and I tried to start this process, but never got through it. We need to reconfigure the well child check. In our clinic, we needed to have more ancillary people helping us collect data so we could be more impactful in terms of what really mattered. Because I think we could have a chance to what I configure what I call WCCTM, well child care that matters.
Yes, absolutely. I really like that. I think we need to get back to the relationship and not so much to these gathering data points to put into a laptop to report to the government. To your point about respect, it's been a very hard 3 years. The national conversation has been around decisions that are made without our input as general pediatricians, and people of all colors, meaning the ones that wear the red hats and the ones that wear the blue hats, both have complained about what is it that pediatricians are thinking today. And it's hard to defend even at the cocktail party or the barbecue when people from both sides just tell you what's going on. What happened to you guys? You guys have no common sense anymore.
I mean, I'm a strong advocate of the leadership of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and I just rolled off as chapter president of the South Carolina chapter of the AAP, and we're trying hard, but it's hard to get that message out there in a viable way.
Well, yeah, but it was hard when the AAP backtracked and supported closing the schools, because everybody from the radiologist to the cleaning lady that I know, they all think that it hurt their kids. The cleaning lady doesn't read what the AAP says or what the newspaper says, but you better believe it, I hear it when I go to the cocktail parties. That hurt my kid. My kid is not doing as well as he was 2 years ago. And these are educated people. Where did that policy come from? Why? Why, as a pediatrician, can you support that? That is hard. That is hard because I have no control of what they do.
Well, I actually did support that, but so I would respectfully disagree, but I understand the point.
Yes. So let's get into something a little more fun, a little sad though, but more fun. And it's your book. It's an excellent book. I have it right here, Conscious Parenting. Let's see if people can see it on the screen. Yes. And why I say it's a little bit disheartening is because seems to me your whole premise is that your job as a pediatrician is to help the parents create empowered, kind citizens. And you very clearly, very eloquently, very beautifully describe what a model citizen should look like. You say they must have humility. They must have sincerity. They must have empathy. They must have vulnerability. They must love others. And more important, they must forgive. And when I look at our leaders and I look at our society today, I don't see any of that being modeled for me or for our kids.
Oh, I would agree. So it's and it looks like it's going to have to be the citizens are going to have to arise and make the difference But you're right. I mean, the leaders who can shout the loudest, who can be the most aggressive and the most annoying, and who can incite the most fear, seems to be able to control the messaging.
But there's no forgiveness. This culture, if you make one mistake at any point in your life, as trivial it might be, and you're canceled. You're canceled. There's no way of redeeming yourself. I'm not talking about barbaric, heinous crimes. I'm just talking about something stupid that you did in your adolescence shows up in a video and you're canceled. Where is the forgiveness in that?
Well, there's a great little book by about Maury Schwartz called Tuesdays with Maury, and written by a sports reporter, Mitch Albom. Maury Schwartz is a sociology professor who's dying with ALS, and Mitch goes to visit him every Tuesday before he dies. And one of the great take-home messages in there is forgive yourself first, forgive others, and do it now. And after I read that book, and after I read some of the other material after I started on this journey that sort of culminated in conscious parenting, I realized forgiveness is one of the most difficult, but one of the most important things we need to do in our lifetime. And if we're not evolving in that journey, we're doing nothing. I mean, when your 4-year-old whacks the 2-year-old, and you say, does the 4-year-old tell him you're sorry? And you go, I'm sorry. I mean, that's very different than what the 16-year-old, 26-year-old, 66-year-old should be doing. And there's the issue of personal forgiveness, but I think we've lost track of what I call communal or social forgiveness. And the example there is the American Medical Association, years past, and I don't know when they stopped this, did not allow Black physicians in the AMA. About 15 years ago, they printed a apology. Now, they could have easily said, it wasn't me, it was them, but they recognized that it was us. And I think we need to be more humble and recognize some of this. It was us. It wasn't me, but it was us as a whole. And that's, in the South here, that's particularly difficult with the Confederate flag. I mean, it's in terms of what that stands for.
Humility is a big one, right? And my biggest example of humility, you seem very humble, and you're very accomplished professionally as a writer. Dan Tomasulo, who's a psychologist and was on the show and has written several books. He was a pediatric psychologist for some time. Is very humble, and Paul Offit, very humble. Ralph Feigen, very humble, and these are, luminaries, geniuses of American pediatrics, right? Then there's some people that are not humble, people who say, I am science. That is not what we need to hear. We need humility for people to respect us. And whenever you sit with somebody like Paul Offit, who invented a vaccine, and his kindness and his humility just shines across, you can't help but be inspired to do better. And we need to model that every day.
Absolutely.
Now, you had an area of the book which is fascinating, where you talk about the difference between making a child happy and really what I call well-being. And I think we've missed that mark tremendously over the last 20 years or 30 years of parenting. What is a happy child?
Let me give a little background for a second, because I sort of evolved myself in terms of trying to understand this. In the 90s, after I'd been in practice for about 15 years, I heard somebody give a talk and say 12 words that made a profound impact on me. I am the problem. I am the solution. I am the resource. that told me that anything that happens in my community, I need to be recognize that it's my problem, not their problem. I need to be part of the solution, and to do that, I need to devote my resources. So that got me on a journey. How can I be more involved? Then Columbine hit. Two teenagers walk into a high school, massacre, 13 people kill themselves. Could that happen in my community? Yes. What have I done to make a difference? Not enough. So that got me going on, okay, what specific action items can Bob Saul put out there to people? And I wrote down what I called the 5 steps to community improvement. And as I started doing that, I started realizing that the importance of being a parent, the importance of pediatricians is to articulate what it means to be raising your children. And as I was looking at happiness, I realized I think what we've lost track of is citizenship. Citizenship, maybe that's a trite word, but I think it encompasses so much. It's people that care for each other, care about each other, are empathic. And that sort of got me back to, because when I was a child, my parents divorced and my mother saying, Bob, I just want you to be happy. And so there was that guilt about being a single parent now. But fortunately for me, I didn't follow her words. I followed her actions, because she was one of those true citizens that helped take care of people. So I think the point of parenting is to raise your children to be good citizens. Happiness is a blissful secondary side effect. Now, I recognize that there are difficulties in there, and that some families really struggle and have difficulties, but I think that's a much better goal than just being happy. And happy means that if I'm happy, I don't care about you. And that really worries me.
So when you say happiness, I think of a 2-year-old that instead of weighing 20 pounds, weighs 40 pounds, because he's happy. Every meal is ice cream and chocolate cake. He's happy. He won't be happy for very long, but he's happy.
Yeah.
Okay. I think of the young people on Instagram, barely dressed in a bikini in Santorini, waiting to see how many likes they get on Instagram or Facebook or one of these, and then being depressed, suicidal, because they didn't get as many likes as they wanted. Yeah. And I think you very eloquently just said it. When I think of people being happy, I think they're sick because they're focused on themselves. And that's not truly happiness. That's fleeting. The moment that you achieve comfort or a state of better well-being is when you're helping others succeed, when you're part of your community, when you have friends, when you have conversations like we can have at the Pediatric Lounge. That's when you feel good. So I don't would say it's happiness. It's just, it's a good feeling.
Absolutely.
I wonder with this citizenship, is that something that's learned or is it something that's ingrained? Because I remember when I was in 3rd grade, I received the Citizenship Award. I didn't know what that meant, but it remained in my head to tell you tonight. Is that learned or is it ingrained in somebody?
I think it's 95% learned.
By 3rd grade, I learned it.
Well, I don't think. I mean, it's like you didn't learn really forgiveness in 3rd grade. I don't think, in terms of what it really the impact tremendously. I think you. I don't know. I think you. It's a learning process, and you have to keep learning. And I understand what you're saying, that you were endowed with citizenship and it was recognized at 3rd grade. But I don't think it was impactful until you became an adult and learned how to make a difference.
Yeah, I think it's habits, right? And it's little things. You live in the South. I think the South is much more genteel than what Northern Virginia and Long Island are today. But when I first bought the house in Virginia, my neighbor came over with a bottle of wine to welcome me to the neighborhood. And I think it's those small gestures that, we became really good friends just because of a small kindness. But that's something that probably somebody taught him along the way. When somebody moves into the neighborhood that's new, you knock on the door and you say hello. Unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that anymore. I love the idea that you mentioned in the book, and we had Jean Marconi the other day on the show, and she kept saying this word, openness. And you said that there are three things that everybody needs to do: be open, be curious, and committed to learning.
It's interesting. I mean, I actually learned that. Though I think it was there when I shifted jobs late in my career, getting out of pediatrics and medical genetics and getting back into pediatrics full time and taking an administrative job as a medical director of general pediatrics. I had to take another leadership course, and I rolled my eyes and said, "Okay." It was called conscious leadership, and I will simplify, but they talked about a line. And when you're above the line, you're open, you're receptive, you're ready to learn. When you're below the line, you're closed, you're defensive, you're always right. And the whole point of conscious leadership is just knowing where you are. You're going to be above, we're human. We're going to be above and below the line. But if you're conscious about where you are, you can then say, okay, do I want to make a change, or I just want to stay here where I am? Or can I be more open? Can I be more committed? Can I be more ready to learn? Because, we've all been in that 3:00 meeting when we're saying to ourselves, when's this thing going to be over? I mean, this is so boring. And so we're now conscious of where we are, that we're below the line. Now we can elect to stay below the line and just continue to look into the clock until 4:00 comes, or we can say, oh, I need to change my focus here. I need to be more engaged. I need to be open, curious, and ready to learn. And so that's, to me, sort of some of the hallmarks of conscious leadership. It became obvious to me as I was going through this course, and then my stint as that administrator. The same thing applies to parenting. Let's be conscious. Let's be open, receptive, and ready to learn. But at times we're going to be closed, defensive, always right, because I said so, because I'm the parent. And that's, to me, what I was talking about when I talk about conscious parenting.
And if you approach parenting in that regard with some openness, because you can't be open to everything. I remember my son one time when he was 3 said, if he jumped out the window, he could fly like Superman. They go through that stage of, that where they think things and you're like, no, that's not true. So you can't be totally open to every idea a child brings to the table, but at least you can listen. And if you're curious about where that idea is coming from, because some of the ideas they come up with are just hilarious. I mean, just hilarious. And committed to learning from their perspective, with their curiosity. I think it's a much more enjoyable journey as a parent than as opposed to, I hear it all the parents all the time, but she's licking everything in the house. I'm like, yes, she's 18 months old. She smells everything. She touches everything. She puts everything in her mouth. She doesn't know the difference. She's learning.
And that's the whole point about conscious parenting. It's a two-way street. You need to know where you are as a parent in the relationship at the time of the encounter, and where your child is developmentally and emotionally. Because if you're not conscious of that, then things tend to go off the rails.
Yes. And so your whole premise of the book, you just explained it, right? Be aware where you are, be aware where your child is, and see if you're comfortable there, or do you need to do a little better?
And that's the I talk about the parental awareness threshold, and that's the line, if you will, trying to be open, receptive, and ready to learn. versus closed, defensive, and always right. And understanding where you are and understanding that in the moment, you're going to make some bad decisions. But hopefully in retrospect, you can recognize that and make some adjustments. And each moment is going to be different. Monday morning at 8 o'clock, in terms of getting everyone ready or going to work or whatever, might be very different than Thursday morning, because it's a different set of items, different set of things happening. The dog did pee in the living room. I mean, there's all those things that factor in. So you have to recognize that you have to be conscious in the moment. You can't just be rote in how you do everything.
You know,
Yes.
I've during my travels, I've met many physicians that are closed, defensive, and always right.
Yes. About 90% of us.
Okay. I guess they didn't read your book. I mean, that's instilled in residency. Think about it, in medical schools.
Well, it's interesting. Of my, let me mention briefly that my, excuse me, my 5 steps to community improvement. Learn to be the best parent you could be. Get involved, stay involved, love for others, and forgiveness. But the first one, learn to be the best parent you could be, has been my journey. When I came out, and I chose those words carefully because parenting is a constant learning experience. Not everyone has the same ability or circumstances, and so has the same capabilities. But when I came out of residency, I was smart. I had read books, I'd been taught. So when people came into the office and said, "What do I do here, doc?" I told them. But it's on this 40-year journey that I realized my job is not as much to tell them, but in some ways is to gently peer behind the curtain, see what's happening, and help empower them, help enable them to be the best parent they could be. Not according to Bob Saul, but according to the circumstances that there are there, and help them on this journey of learning to be the best parent they can be.
Wow, what beautiful words.
Yeah.
What beautiful words. You're absolutely right. I'm speechless. To your point, which is, I probably shouldn't share this on the air, but it was a really fun story. I took my my son, he must have been 10 years old. I think this time we were at the Beaver Creek or Vale skiing, but he wasn't, out in the East Coast, there's not a lot of good skiing places. So you get to ski once a year. And as every good 10-year-old boy, what do they love? Speed. He tucked it in and he went straight down the mountain. And he was not that skilled. And I'm, skiing behind, screaming, "Stop, stop, you're going to kill yourself. You're going to kill somebody." And the more I yelled, the faster he tried to go. Till I finally caught up to him, picked him up with one hand and put him on the ground. And he gets up like a boy, right? An alpha male. "Why'd you do that for?" I'm like, "Because you're going to kill yourself, or you're going to clip somebody and leave him without a leg." And he goes, "You're so mean." I'm like, "But you're alive." And if you pull that again on me, the trip is over. He goes, "Oh, I don't understand." Here's his favorite word. "It's a curse to be the son of a pediatrician." But to my point is, not every parenting moment allows you to be the best parent that you want to be. I don't know if somebody had told me this is going to happen today, maybe I could have prepared better for that circumstance. But at that moment, my fear was that he's going to end up head first onto a tree, paralyzed, or he's going to hurt another human being. And I got to stop him.
I think you were the best parent you could be. I mean, you stopped him. I mean, he didn't like that, but that's what some parenting is about, is when you have to physically end that reckless behavior that could have severely harmed or killed him and other people. So I don't see that as being because I said so, because I'm the parent, as being inappropriate at that time. I mean,
what about all these parents that we see today that don't want to be parents? They want to be the kid's friend.
Oh, toxic.
Well, I think that's not our job. our job is to be the positive example, but make sure that that the children are doing what needs to be done. And you can be the friend and the parent at the same time. But I think sometimes you have to be careful. I mean, let me give you one of my personal examples, very different than yours, Herb. I think my son was about 7 or 8. He said something that really set me off one night, and it really made me angry. And I yelled at him. He turned into a puddle. He was one of these sensitive children that just turned into a puddle. And my wife got mad at me for yelling, and we went into that family meltdown mode that I'm sure never happened in either of your houses, but everyone walks past each other for 2 hours and never talks. Then we find that the dust settled, and I laid down with my son. I said, "Son, I'm so sorry. I think you did something wrong, but Dad's response was totally inappropriate, and I want to apologize. I want to ask for your forgiveness." And we talked some more, and he said, "Dad, would you be quiet?" I said, "Why?" He said, "I hate it when you're nice." And I don't say that to pat myself on the back. What I say that is, I think even back then there was some of this conscious parenting in me, recognizing that in the moment I made a decision that was wrong. I mean, I think he was still wrong, but I should have handled it very differently than what I did. I think you physically stopping your son from doing such a reckless behavior was quite appropriate. It's like if your child runs out in the street, you can't say, "Come on back." I mean, you've got to get them.
Yes, and raising boys, I didn't have any girls, but raising boys is very different than raising girls. He would also get upset because I have this rule. I would tell him 3 times not to do something. The 4th time is a tap in the back of the head. And he would always have the same reactions. "What are you doing that for?" I'm like, "I've asked you 3 times. We got to go to church. And you're still in your underwear in my room playing video games. So I need to get your attention. Next time, do what I asked by number 2nd or number 3rd. That way you don't get tapped in the back of the head." And he's like, "Whoa." And then he go get dressed, right? Obviously, you could never do that with most young girls. That would ensue a crying event, and your wife would kill you afterwards. But but parenting is tough.
Yeah.
You have an advice which reminded me of a book that I read called The Optimistic Child. And it's an advice for parents, which I think it should be an advice for everybody. And you say that you need to model for your children 3 steps. You call it pause, assess, and choose. Dr. Gilman calls it define your adversity, get in touch with your beliefs are, and the consequence of your actions. But what is the importance of stopping in the moment and taking a deep breath?
I think I talk about it as in the parenting context, but I think it's almost every interaction we have with another person requires that sort of set. Pausing is just taking that deep breath, is avoiding a knee-jerk reaction, assessing what's happening from multiple factors, and then choosing a response. You might choose in the moment the wrong response, but hopefully in retrospect, you can assess that. And I use the example in my book of a mother picks up a child from school, goes through the drive-through because the child says she's really thirsty, gets her a big drink, hands it to the back and says, "Don't spill this." 2 blocks later, "Mom, my drink spilled." So your immediate reaction is, "I told you not to," and you pull over and you start to clean up and you're yelling at the child and everything. Well, pause. 1, was it wise to get a big drink and pass it to your child in a manner that they might have spilled it? 2, could it have been that the book bag tipped the drink over when you made that turn fast at the last block? And then 3, just choose an appropriate response. And it might have been that the child that everything, you put the drink in a drink holder and everything was correct and the child still was negligent. But is it appropriate to be yelling and screaming for spilled drink in a car? Choose, pause, assess, and choose. That's hard to do in almost every interaction we have, but I think it's critical.
Yes. And so you co-wrote the book on ACEs and with Andy Gardner.
Correct.
And so when you say it's so important to pause, what comes right into the back of my brain is the amygdala. So we're still primitive animals, whether we want to admit it or not. So we think very much, or we don't think, our amygdala reacts to everything that happens to us with one of 4 responses: either freeze, fight, run, or get other people to help me fight. And when you say pause, what I'm trying to do is stop that lower order of functioning and bring it up to where I can make better choices. Is that exactly what you had in mind?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that, and we know now from the adolescent brain, isn't, adequately, the prefrontal cortex, which helps modulate a lot of what you're talking about, really isn't adequately developed until 25 years of age. So, young adults don't even have a reasonably mature brain until their mid-20s. I'm not sure mine was mature until many decades later in terms of appropriate responses.
You can ask.
You have to, I mean, that's the whole point is if life isn't a learning experience, you're not paying attention. So if you're not able to over time sort of modulate your amygdala, you've got a problem.
Yes. You can ask George about the level of my prefrontal lobe functioning.
Almost non-functioning.
Almost non-functioning. I have many skills, but the ability to keep my mouth shut is not one of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and you remind me of a pediatrician. I don't remember his name, but I met him at a meeting in Richmond. It was an academy meeting on management of pediatrics. And we were talking at the cocktail party of how hard it is to be a parent. I said, Nelson's textbook, Goski's textbook, 3 years of residency, none of it really prepared me to be a parent. I don't, the kids come up with the darndest things. And he had the best analogy, which is, I think, it comes to mind when I was reading your book. He said, Herb, what you don't get is that every child of yours, even with the same woman, you don't get divorced. They all live in the same house. It's a different dance. And as a parent, through their journey of their lives, your role is to dance with them without stepping on their toes. And each one will teach you a different journey. He said, my first kid, straight A's, never had to do anything to motivate her. She just did everything she was supposed to do. My second kid was artistic. My last kid taught me how dysfunctional the penal system is in America. He got in all kinds of sort of trouble. And, but at the end of the day, it's just, you need to dance the dance they want and not step on their toes. And I thought that was a marvelous analogy of what parenting is.
I think that really, you're absolutely right. And it really holds for pediatricians too. Each child, each family is a unique dance. We tend to try to generalize sometimes to help us get through the day in a big workload. But we have to recognize that each encounter, each time we walk through a new door, it's a new dance.
It is.
And children don't read the textbooks.
Oh, they don't.
Forget about that.
They don't. I don't know how children survive. I really don't. I don't understand how a newborn comes out where everything is being done for you. And within a couple of minutes, you're sucking on the breast and getting fed. It's a miracle. It's marvelous.
Yeah.
And it happens every day. So tell me, because you piqued my curiosity when you said you would totally redesign the well-child experience. What would be the ideal well-child experience in your mind?
Well, I think each practice would be unique, but in my mind, there would be much like you have a nurse that does your vitals. In my mind, you'd have a nurse or a child care specialist that does the vitals and an intake of a variety of factors that make a difference in the life of the child. Various socioeconomic factors, social determinants of health, finding out what's happening, and spend some time with the family before the physician comes in. So the physician now can sort of, the two together as a team can start to make a difference in terms of what actually needs to happen for that child going forward and out of that office. And, maybe the family just, well child care, again, to my mind, became this box checking experience. And I wanted to make sure that the box checking is important to make sure we're asking certain questions, but we can do it as a team rather than putting the burden all on the physician and taking their time away from doing more important trust building, counseling with the family going forward.
Do you have any thoughts on that, George?
I always say that the relationships are very, very important. In our office, we have the nurse that goes in. She does the vitals and the growth charts and all that, and inputs the data. Then we have the physician that does all, past medical history. What are you doing? Allergies, developmental stuff. We have implemented, however, some technology to ask some of those questions that you're talking about on Freesia. But unfortunately, there's a lot of questions, and who has time to read all those things? And people don't fill them out. And I don't think people really want to stay in the office all that long.
No.
I've learned over time, people want access to care. They want to come in. They want to go out as quick as possible.
My biggest concern is because I guess I'm very sensitized because of the last 8 years of my career being in this Medicaid clinic, being able to assess what we know when the book that Andy Garner and I wrote, being able to, because so important is assessing the presence or absence of SSNRs, safe, stable, nurturing relationships in the life of a child. That is almost impossible to do in the current setting. And I'm not sure I have the answer, but I think we need to redirect our efforts to looking to how to do that.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. And Andy speaks to that as we need to stop being a system that looks for disease and one that looks for strength in children and speak to their strength. And as you said before, help the parent and the child, that duo, achieve what they can achieve in the way they want to achieve it, not in the way that Bright Futures tells me I'm supposed to tell them to do it. Because each one is very different.
Right.
That definitely that's I think our biggest challenge. How do we take back pediatrics and the humanity of medicine and put it back in the exam room to make a difference on the next generation?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think just by speaking and interacting and talking to people and staying away from the darn computer. I think that's the way to do it.
But there's a lot of pressure to get all that chart done and that prescription sent, and all those boxes clicked before the end of the day. And I have to do it in the exam room, because if I don't do it in the exam room,
You forgot.
I'll see 3 patients and I'll forget what I was supposed to do for them. So I gotta write that prescription, and I want to make sure I wrote the prescription. I wrote it right, and I sent it to the pharmacy before the patient leaves the exam room. So I know there's not going to be a problem. They're not going to get to the pharmacy and the prescription's not there. So it's a difficult balancing Very
But
difficult.
I also think it's the technology that's used and the infrastructure of the office and the support services. So if you have good support services and you have good infrastructure and technology, you don't have to deal with all that stuff. I mean, I know the product that you use in your office, it's really, really, really heavy. It's
It
not
is.
pediatric friendly. The
Not at
product
all.
we use in our office, Office Practicum, it's, it's written and made by pediatricians for us. So let me tell you, I can do all those things while talking to the patients and having a conversation with the patient and talking to them face to face. We designed our office, our rooms, to have a little desk where we can actually see and speak to them and type at the same time, as opposed to having our backs to them. And the first thing
Yes.
that I do with I have medical students that come in, and I tell them, don't focus so much on the computer, focus on the patient. Talk to them. The computer is always, you just fill it out later. It just templates that overlap, and I don't know.
Do you have any
And
thoughts?
in my practice at the end, I needed to have I needed to have social work usually come in. I needed to have a variety of support services. And so I wish I had had someone that could have sort of triaged some of these things so I could have been more intentional in terms of my intervention rather than just sort of flailing.
Yes. Yes. It's a yes. I think that relationship is very important. It doesn't matter whether you're a pediatrician or a pediatric emergency room doctor, a pediatric urgent care doctor. Everything starts with a relationship, and the relationship may be very short, right? My career has been mostly peds ER, peds urgent care. Every patient's a new patient, and but you develop some sort of relationship. Might be short-term relationship, but it's a relationship where you can take care of the patients. I think the humanity of that interaction is sorely missing in American healthcare today, and that leads to unhappy patients, unhealthy populations, and physician burnout.
Yeah.
It's not enjoyable.
They said that in the House of God, the second part 2. Let's put the humanity back into healthcare. And the theory was get rid of the computer.
Yeah.
But one of the most significant encounters I remember, because it sort of redirected some of my efforts. So I remember one night I was busy seeing 30 patients. I was the only doc in the office. It was winter, I was going through as fast as I could. Asked this one mom to put the child down on the table so I could look in his ears. 18-month-old child was screaming. Of course, as a pediatrician, I didn't hear the screaming. I never hear screaming. Mother looked down at the child and said, "Shut up." Now, what's the most significant health problem that child had? Had nothing to do with that febrile illness. It was that parental nurturing or lack thereof. Did I have the time or the energy to address that? No. And that's what was very discouraging for me.
How would you address that, though? You can't change the parent.
Well, I think you can, no, you can't change it in the moment, but you could try to start a process where if you had some other folks in your office or some other resources, you could identify somebody and ask them to come back. Now, they probably won't come back, but maybe you could get them on subsequent visits. There are ways of trying to do that instead of just be as dismissive as I was at the time and say, "Here, he has an ear infection, take this and I'll see you."
Yeah. Yeah, but it's all you can do. You got 30 sick kids, you got to take care of everyone.
I know.
And it's not possible to do it. I mean, you try to do the best you can every day, but it's did I fail to mention anything? Because I think you have a lot of wisdom to share, and I'm not sure if I even touched the tip of the iceberg of the things that we could talk about with you. But is there something you want to share with the audience that you think would be really important for pediatricians to take to heart?
I think the most important thing is empathy and forgiveness, and continue to practice forgiveness. Forgive yourself for when you've made that mistake, when you recognize at the end of the day that third patient encounter, maybe you didn't do as well as you should have. Forgive yourself. and learn from that. But learn how to forgive others too when when the situation arises.
Great. I love that lesson. I think that's very wise.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thank you.
Love your library. Love the bow tie. And I hope you'll come back and we'll have other conversations on leadership.
I'd love to.
That would be very interesting to talk about, lessons in leadership for young pediatricians.
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This has been a production of the Pediatric Lounge. On the show notes, you will find links to our co-host and other important notes, as well as a timetable of the topics discussed today. Don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave us a great review, as it helps us greatly. In the meantime, we will see you next week. The Pediatric Lounge. The conversations are not intended as medical advice, and the opinions expressed are solely those of the host and the guest.